Hello and welcome to Dropping at Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we're talking about Rocketman, which you saw a couple of days ago.
Yes.
You saw on Friday and I just saw yesterday.
Yes. And I'm wondering if my memory is going to be like fresh enough to kind of, get the most out of it in this podcast, but we'll give it a go.
Well, we'll see. I loved it.
I loved it.
I didn't have particularly high expectations. I didn't know much about it, but I thought the trailer looked kind of... I just didn't like the look of the trailer, to be honest. But I was just in love with it from the moment it started.
I had several things against it going in, really. So, first of all, I'm not a particular fan of Elton John. And actually, I went in with the idea that I'm not a particular fan of Elton John. And then the experience of watching the film led me to a different conclusion. We can talk about that later. But, initially that was like, I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I disliked Bohemian Rhapsody so much that I thought, oh no.
The film Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah. Right. Not another one of these rock star bios that, kind of are for the fans and they'll whitewash everything, and really, who needs to see it? So those were two, and also...
Directed by the same guy. Well, Dexter Fletcher took over for the last 2 weeks of filming on Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, but only a few weeks, right? What I know Dexter Fletcher from is he did that Scottish musical, didn't he? Sing Street or something like that.
I don't know it.
Which I did like very much.
Sunshine on Leith?
Sunshine on Leith, that's what I meant, yeah. Which I really liked. But I didn't register to me that was the same director, actually.
Right.
It's something that I only found out after I'd seen the film, and I thought, oh, who did this? I like it so much. I was really surprised, and actually, though I thought Taron Egerton was very good in the Kingsman films, I thought, well, he's very good, but
there's something just a little bit missing.
There was something missing.
There's a star aspect that's slightly missing.
That's right. And my God, in the first 5 minutes of this film, when he's walking as Elton, with the horns and the suit, and there's something about his walk which is kind of very butchy, right? And I just thought, oh my God, this is fantastic, right? It was just like, an actor who was relishing, kind of his part and getting the most out of it. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun, really.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, my relationship with Elton John is as someone who didn't really know the music. I knew the star persona in a way. Obviously, I didn't grow up in the 70s and 80s. I grew up in the 90s, and late 90s. And so I obviously knew who Elton John was, and I knew some of the music. I knew the kind of the 5 or 6 kind of greatest hits. I'd heard them, but the Elton John that I was aware of was someone who I knew was gay, and I knew there was this clip that was occasionally shown on TV of him in the, I want to say, 80s, talking about his marriage. And he's like talking to a caller who's called into this TV show, who's asked how is he happy in his marriage, and he says, yes, we're very happy. And this was shown on TV in the late 90s and early 2000s as a kind of, oh, who is he trying to fool type of thing.
Oh, right, okay.
I suppose in comparison to the Freddie Mercury film, I think there seems to be a difference in that it really wasn't supposed to... Is it the case that he wasn't really known to be gay until he came out, Elton John? Whereas with Freddie Mercury, it was kind of, he was really a gay icon.
No, they were kind of very similar in a way, I think, insofar as, Queen was a heavy metal band. So, when I was growing up, all the kids who were into like hard rock or something, they loved Queen because they thought it was like a more sophisticated version of that kind of big stadium rock band, right?
Yeah.
So, but then of course Freddie Mercury, he did do opera. I mean, there was always something about him, right? Whereas to me, Elton John, I mean, I remember when I first saw him, really, which was on the cover of Time magazine when I must have been like 8 or 9 or something, right? So actually he's been a figure all my life. I remember him also seeing him in the Cher show, singing with Cher, right? Right. So there's kind of, but the gay aspect really didn't register with me. And I was talking with my friend Andy, and he was saying, well, he always twigged on something, and Elton was an important figure for him. For me it wasn't. And I remember I did have one of his albums. I had the Yellow Brick Road album, which I loved, you know, but I just picked it up because it was on the bargain bin, right? Like, you know, there used to be a secondhand record store in Montreal called Cheap Thrills, where you could pick up albums for 50 cents, you know, from their bargain bin, and I had just picked it up, and, you know, so it wasn't something that I saw, though I must get the latest Elton John album or something. It was just something that was there. And then I loved it. But, you know, kind of the songs, you know, the lyrics are all lyrics written by a heterosexual man. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought he wrote his own lyrics. I had no idea he had a writer.
Well, for most, I mean, I'm sure he has written some, but most of the songs that you will recognize as his are written by a straight man. And you can tell, or I can tell, right? And then the thing about his star persona is he was definitely theatrical. He wore outrageous outfits. There's no question about any of that. But actually, as we see in the film, his whole manner of being, right, the way he walks and the way he's got a bolshiness, right? He's quite... Like,
this is something you were talking about.
Right?
Something you were talking about on Facebook, which again jives with what I knew of when I was young about Elton John. Because I remember the Royal Mail adverts where he was. It was very well known that he was a shopaholic, and there's the whole thing about him getting flowers delivered and how the Royal Mail could facilitate that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of, there was this combination in those adverts of a blokishness with being surrounded by flowers in a palatial sort of, you know.
Yeah, but there's a trajectory to that, right? Because obviously what happened is, at some point, he did come out, and it's still, for people of my generation, there's still a little bit of resentment against people like him and Ian McKellen, you know, who all of a sudden become like icons of gay liberation or something. Because in our view, they didn't help when help was needed most. I don't know exactly what year Elton John came out, right? But he got married in the 80s.
Yeah.
So, right, and that was very much a kind of a cover-up marriage. It was like, it was like Rock Hudson, right? Being married to someone to save his career type of thing, right? So there's always, mind you, you know, intellectually you feel you can't judge these people. People have to come out at their own pace and in ways that they feel safe, and that's different for everybody, right? You know, so it might be unreasonable to feel this niggling sense of resentment against these people. But I think actually it also comes because, you know, now they're like holier than thou about, you know, I mean, you know, kind of about coming out, right? And you think, well, you know, kind of when I was at that demonstration, there were 50 people in that fucking kind of, you know, cold Montreal, you know, kind of protest. Kind of, where were all of you then, right? Like, yeah. So, but anyway, I love his persona, and I love that he's blokish, right? That he owned the football team, and kind of it just goes to show, you know, how different people are, really. Yeah, the kind of gay people are like everybody else in all kinds of ways, right? Yeah. It kind of, you know, there's a whole spectrum. But you know, I love the bolshiness. Yeah, they're not taking shit from people. I love the blokishness, and there is a blokishness, which also has to do with awkwardness, right? So I was looking at the George Michael duet that he did of "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me," yeah. And you have like, I mean, you know, George Michael looks like a Greek god, really. He's like so beautiful, you know, and he's tall and slim, and he dances beautiful, and he's a great performer. And, you know, Elton comes in and he's too short, and he's like too fat, and he has a surly look on him, right? You know? Yeah. And he's great. Yeah, like kind of, you know, and then like he, you know, he sings the song with him, and he's generous as well. Yeah, like what I mean, one of the things about Elton John was always he was, you know, he was very generous with other performers. Yeah. Yeah. You know, he's always like bigging up other people, yeah, and kind of appreciating them, you know. So I love all of that, but you know, there's a contrast between, you know, the kind of, I mean, both of them came out very late, but you know, the type of gayness that George Michael represented, and that which Elton John represented.
But that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, there's a sort of, it's probably overdoing it to say there's like a lack of campiness about Elton John today. In the, I mean, because when you think about Elton John, he's still, you know, he's still dressing up as sort of You think on him dressing up as Elizabeth
Marie
I
Antoinette or something,
Christ,
yes.
but it is a weird kind of incongruous look. Like he is a bloke in this
In a
dress.
dress.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. There is a definite incongruity.
He's not trying
there.
to be feminine.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But then these days, I mean, he's kind of the Elton John that as I said, kind of I know in a way is one who wears suits and just looks like a bloke with funny glasses at most.
Yeah, that's why people have criticized this film for not being queer enough, and I think part of it is, and I personally don't see any problem with that, but that the ideology that the film conveys and supports, and which is really, I think, the character or the persona that Elton John kind of evokes, is just somebody wanting normalcy, right? Yeah, kind of somebody wanting love and being in a relationship and having children.
Yeah,
right.
A heteronormacy.
Yes, I think. Well, I mean,
is that the criticism? Like he didn't want to have a kind of gay life. He wanted to have a straight life just as a gay man.
Well, I suppose kind of part of the kind of criterion or the characteristics of queerness, as at least in some definitions, I'm qualifying in all kinds of ways here, is that basically homophobia forces people to be imaginative with their lives, right? So, if you can't get married and, if you're forbidden from adopting children at one point or anything, then you have to invent different types of lives that are just as fulfilling, right? But different, right? Whereas actually, this is kind of very much reproducing the standard heterosexual kind of normative, like, he's now married to someone, they have two children, or maybe 3 now, kind of,
There's certainly 2 in the titles at the end of the film.
Yeah, so, that's kind of just, reproducing a pattern that hadn't heretofore been available, is now available, but really the structure of that is a heterosexual one.
Well,
as I said, I personally feel that, people find happiness where they can. And, hurrah for them if they can find it in those ways that they want and they aspire to. I don't have a problem with it.
Well, I think that kind of, in a way, speaks to something that I was thinking all the way through watching it, which is that I really like Elton John. I didn't know him that well, and I didn't know his music that well, but he seems so bloody likeable. And in a way, this film functions as a kind of autobiography, because he's involved in it.
Yes.
So it's not the same as the Freddie Mercury film, where Freddie Mercury had passed away and had no say in it.
This is the way Elton wants to be seen.
Right. And I think, so there is this thing about you kind of wondering what's been whitewashed, what's been changed, that sort of thing. But the film doesn't come across as whitewashed. The film comes across as showing him in his darkest moments, in his kind of depths of addiction to cocaine and that sort of thing.
I admire him very much for that, actually.
But I think in a subtle way, like that's what makes it so likeable. Like knowing that Elton John's behind it, and knowing that he's allowing his story to be told this way, or wants his story to be told this way, is what makes it so likeable. The feeling of openness to it. Except
that one of the things that the film does is create this distance. So actually, and maybe part of the way that why it's acceptable to Elton John himself and to the audience is, I used to be like really promiscuous and kind of and battered, and I think the film begins by saying I'm a shopaholic, I'm a drug addict, I'm a bulimic and blah blah. But kind of the coda at the end with him doing Happy Families means, okay, that's the way I was. Yeah. Right.
The film ends while he's just come out of rehab, more or less, and he's still in kind of a reasonably youngish looking mode. I mean, he's still played by Taron Egerton, and he's still in kind of fancy dress and whatever. Whereas it cuts to then 5 or 6 photographs of Elton as he is now, looking very different, dressed in suits and kind of looking more sort of down to earth. And it's the Elton that you're seeing in those photos right at the end, updating you on who he is now, is not the same as the Elton you've seen in the film, in a way. There is a difference there.
There is a difference. Though, I want to give credit to the film, really, because, it also... So in this argument about is it queer, is it not queer, whatever, one of the things that it does manage to show very well is the structures of oppression that gay men live through. So basically, he's completely separated from his father, and part of the reason is, he's a Nancy. He's a fairy. His father. You get the feeling watching the film that his father can't stand looking at him. Really, that. Yeah, he's too effeminate. He's looking at Vogue patterns. So there's that. There's also a kind of a disdain from the mother, right? There's also like this incredible inability to kind of, to find love, and there's no kind of rituals and, questions of dating. There's also the danger that he places himself in, often kind of loving the wrong people, like heterosexual ones. So, we get to see him making a pass at Bernie Taupin, and of course, Bernie Taupin in the film is very kind and so on. But imagine all of those people who weren't, right? Yeah. So, and obviously kind of being coerced or emotionally kind of coerced into a marriage, being abused and blackmailed by people.
John Reed in particular.
But you also get the feeling there have been many like John Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mother says, you buy them houses and whatever, and so, yeah, and physically battered, right? So kind of, yeah, it actually, I do think it does show those structures of oppression that were like so real and vivid, and, kind of, maybe the only problem I have with the film is the coda, this happy families thing. I find it quite sickening. And also the putting all of this in the past, as if there aren't people today, both in this country and abroad, who aren't suffering from the same structures of homophobia,
The film places Elton John as really the victim in it all as well, in the way he's treated. And I think he comes across as incredibly sympathetic.
He does.
But do you think that do you think it comes across as artificial?
No.
See, I didn't at all.
No, I don't.
Despite knowing this is the thing. Despite knowing that Elton John's behind the film and can tell his story how he likes, it feels really authentic and believable and likable. And maybe I put certain things aside because I want to like it so much, which I do. And I think it's beautifully made, and it's a brilliant musical as well on top of that.
I think Taron Egerton is so great in this, in a way that, what was it,
Rami
Malek wasn't in
Bohemian
Rhapsody. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Malek was very, very good. But you really get a sense here of a flesh and blood person, kind of bursting out. I mean, he feels really alive, right? Whereas with Malek, you saw the impersonation of Freddie Mercury, you saw all the tics, but I never felt that there was a real person.
It didn't come together until that final scene that we loved, where they reenact Band Aid.
That's true.
But it's not to say that was a real person, but he embodies that persona very well.
He embodied that performance of that iconic moment in Wembley.
Yeah.
But this is different. I mean, just from the beginning, just the walk, that Egerton has, like kind of
his smile as well.
Yeah,
the perfect smile.
But the walk, I think, because it exudes energy and bolshiness and and so on, and you get the feeling that it is like a kind of a real person, because on the one hand he's quite queenie, he's always having hissy fits and he's got a short temper, and and kind of part of it is just the drug mess that he's in. But on the other hand, there is a kind of a strength, that he conveys, and obviously like a great talent, So.
Yeah, again, that was another thing which I kind of thought that he's a prodigy at the piano, and he sits down, hears something, and he can immediately play it.
Yes. And
you're like, can he really? But then there are people like that,
No, well, I understand.
The thing about like getting the lyrics and just immediately playing the music to them.
Yeah.
But then I saw he was on Inside the Actors Studio.
Yeah.
I think he got. Someone in the audience had like a packet of something, and he just started singing the ingredients and instructions.
Yes.
And like making up a song to them. It was beautiful.
Yes.
So like some people can do that.
Actually, he's amazing. I heard that he wrote all of the score of The Lion King, through fax. They would
Oh really?
It wasn't him being in a room, with the people. It was like. Yeah. You send me the lyrics, I send you a song. If it doesn't work, send me some other lyrics, I'll send you another song. Right? Like,
And I think the film makes you get it as well. Like again, when we were talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, we agreed that it's a film that doesn't really convey why this music was so great if you didn't already know.
Yes.
I think. And I think this film kind of does. And I think the way the musical works, you were talking again on Facebook about how it narrativizes through music and how it tells its story and evokes emotion through music, which I think is great. It's not like saying, it doesn't do the thing of just picking out the song that has the right lyrics to sort of tell the plot. But it tells the emotional story through the music, and it brings in songs when it needs to, like the bit the bit underwater, where he's singing Rocketman, just a snatch of Rocketman with his younger self, and he's killed himself. He tried to kill himself by drowning himself. Is extraordinary. I teared up at that moment, and I teared up 3 times actually.
Oh really? Which ones?
It was right at the start. It was Border Song, which the whole family sings at the start, which I never heard Border Song before, and the way the family sings it is, kind of one person sings a line, another person sings another line, and then they kind of come together. And when they were doing that, and the camera's moving through the house, and everyone's taking their turn, I thought, oh, this is so cheesy. Like, this is dangerous.
It's like Meet Me in St. Louis, the beginning of Meet Me in St. Louis.
But it works so well. And actually, I think it has an Elton John-y sort of vibe to it, where it has this cheesiness, but Elton John's quite cheesy, and it really works, and it sells it, and you believe in it. And so, when the film kind of did slightly dangerous things like that, and then got away with them, I cheered.
Yes.
So there's that bit where I teared up. There's the bit underwater with Rocketman, and there was right at the end where the structuring kind of story, the framing device of the group therapy session comes to a head, and you see him talking to his family who he imagines are there, which again I thought, God, this is dangerous. If you don't nail this, this is an awful moment. But I bought it hook, line and sinker, and I went with it completely. I was practically crying. It was wonderful.
What I loved most was the moment, again it's a family moment, where they take one of his songs, the I Want Love, and they split it into, it's sung by every member of the family. And actually, I thought that was so brilliant, because I remember when the song came out, and, really, I think by that point, Elton had come out. And so, I just read it as a gay man's song, kind of, an assertion of a need for love, right? As the lyrics kind of underline. But what the film does is it makes it so empathetic, because basically, the film takes that song, and instead of just kind of making this individual desire for love, it actually kind of splits it into every member of the family. So every member of the family has, a need for a love that isn't being met in the structures that they are inhabiting, right? So kind of, to spread that to the father and to the mother and to the grandmother and as well as him, I thought was like a brilliant moment that opened up the film, that kind of, and also
I'm wondering if it's the moment I described and I just got the song wrong.
I think that might be, but I think the song is I Want Love.
All right. Well, it was wonderful anyway.
To me that was like kind of one of the highlights of the film. And actually, it's a film that I do want to see again, because I was so caught up in the music and the structure and Egerton's performance. And actually, the thing is, Egerton was not the only one who was good, and actually I must remember that, because, Bryce Dallas Howard as the mother was fantastic. And also, it took me a while to recognize her, actually.
No, I recognised her immediately, but I thought it was the quality of the accent. I was thinking, is that Bryce Dallas Howard? Like, she can't be doing an English mum, but she was. I thought she was great.
Yeah, she was great. And also, the guy from television who plays the manager lover, Richard Madden.
Richard Madden, yes.
He was wonderful. He kind of oozed snake oil.
Well, it has that thing. It's it does have elements of those tropes that could work very negatively of kind of a gay man who is kind of perpetually alone and unable to love this sort of thing, and then you have the manager character taking advantage, and the kind of, again, to compare it to Bohemian Rhapsody, the way it worked in Bohemian Rhapsody was the most out kind of visibly gay character, and that just was evil, which was something awful. That's not exactly the case here, but he is nonetheless a prominent gay character in this who is evil, and you can tell from the start he's kind of bad news, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of certainly got that feeling myself.
And just taking advantage of, people's vulnerabilities and need for love and affection.
Exactly. But in this, as much as I can see that trope, it feels like the film made it work.
Yes, I think so too. And actually, there are other similarities. For example, there was the moment where he got beaten up, where I thought, oh my God, this is such a trope of these type of musicals, right? It's like in the Tina Turner musical, right, where Ike kind of bashes her, right? Though kind of, the film doesn't make any of them defining moments, right? Kind of, they're all moments that have kind of reverberations onto other showbiz, rock musicals, but that kind of don't define the character, which I thought was really beautiful. So, and the reason why I want to see it again is because I think the film is probably a lot more visually interesting than I registered. It's just that I didn't register it.
I think it's really well made, and it's really nicely. I think it visualizes things really nicely. But I do want to see it again as well. And I think part of it is that I got totally sucked in, and I wasn't even thinking.
Yes.
And I just got lost in it. It was wonderful.
Yes.
And realizing, to a lesser extent than you did, how great this music is and how important it is, and how I have heard it always, and actually how much better it is than I ever gave it credit for.
Yes.
Which is something that I never really did.
That's how I feel. So I suppose when we began, I was thinking, well, I've never really been an Elton John fan, and so on. I mean, like I said, I had one of his albums, but really that's almost like an accident of history. He was so big in the 70s, right, that I was able to get one of his albums in the 50-cent bin, because they had just sold so many copies that people got rid of them, But then actually listening to the film, it really kind of made me realize this is like a soundtrack to my life. I have been listening to these songs my whole life. Right, and there were moments in most of them that had moved me at some point in my life, that I connected to, Daniel or I'm Still Standing, or a whole bunch of them. You can remember where you were, when you heard them actually. So again, I have kind of these memories of being a child and watching I forget whether it was the Cher show or the Sonny and Cher show, where he appeared. Yeah, of seeing the Time magazine cover with him, and that was where he played the stadium, where he was dressed in the baseball suit that you see in the film. I mean, I remember that moment, and he appeared with those glasses in the cover of Time magazine. I remember, I'm watching the I'm Still Standing video, when I had moved out and I was living with my then partner, and kind of MTV was very big, and that was on constant play on MTV. So kind of, it brings back moments, I'll
tell you another reason.
I'll
tell you another reason I think that it's successful as a musical is that it's not just about playing this music when they chronologically fit in the story or anything like that, and it's not about playing the music because of what it meant to its audience, although it is, which I think is what Bohemian Rhapsody was doing. Bohemian Rhapsody was these songs come up to just show how big the band was, and just because you like the music.
Yes.
But this film listens to its music's lyrics.
Yes.
And plays the music and sings the songs when they fit. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, I think, is used fantastically when he kind of finally decides to go to therapy, and it replays the bit, it catches up with the start of the film where he strides into group therapy, and it's playing it under it, and it's doing this arrangement with trumpets, it turns it into this incredibly triumphant moment, which is, I thought it was fantastic. It's such a heroic, triumphant moment where he decides, I'm going to get help at last.
Yes.
It's amazing. And it understands music. It's about, I've been on the Yellow Brick Road for so long, and I've decided that my future isn't here. And I'm going to change the track and all that sort of thing. It's a film that understands and listens to its own music and uses it properly.
What I liked in relation to what you're saying was Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting.
Yeah.
Because actually, one of the things that I really love about this film is, and maybe I'm wrong about it, but, is what I see as its Englishness. I see it as a very kind of English movie, right? And that moment, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, the way that it's visualized, him walking from the lane, from the back lane of his, kind of house, and, the pub, and, kind of, people
Yeah.
fighting on us, getting drunk and fighting on a Saturday night, and yeah, there is a kind of whole tropes of British culture, really, but I think there's a peculiar Englishness to it as well, right? Like Pinner is much made of, the suburban semi is much made of, you know, the way that those houses look and how they're decorated and how people eat in them, and kind of I see it as a.
And isn't it nice that it doesn't feel like it has that beige thing that we were talking about again with Bohemian Rhapsody? Although I think it really beautifully evokes the way that you think of life in the 70s in little English suburban places, but it doesn't feel like it's nostalgic for it. It just feels like it's showing it.
Yes.
You know?
You know, that's the way it was. Yeah, like kind of, you know. But there are beautiful moments. I mean, it made me think of, again, in very different ways, Two Distant Voices Still Lives, right? You know, all those scenes in the pub with the family kind of singing along to the tunes, in the pub, right? So this film has those sing-alongs, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of going to the pub, you know, obviously it's very different than Still Lives. I mean, the child is not physically abused by the parents and so on, you know. But also, I mean, in Distant Voices, the father and the mother, and, you know, it's not too different here except for the abuse. But this is just background, yeah? This is kind of, like you say, it's kind of, this is the way that these people live their lives, you know, and it's gone. But it was like this, right? So I thought that was, like, very, very interesting to me.
Yeah. I thought it was absolutely... I was really blown away by how much I liked it. I really didn't expect to. And I found it such a great sort of sing-along, toe-tapping. I think the fact that it gets away with little dangerous things and makes them work, it somehow like sells the whole film for me and makes me feel so faithful. And Taron Egerton is just so charismatic and commands your attention all the way through so brilliantly. And he moves so. I mean, you know, I need talking about his walking, but every moment that he's on screen moves. And actually, isn't it so great that the kids are good as well? So rare in a British film to have young actors who are good.
My least favourite moment, though, so I have two niggles with the film so far. I might come up with more. But, you know, the moment where he hugs his younger self, I thought...
I love that bit. That was in the group therapy bit at the end, and I was like, I'm going with this. I am going with this. But I agree. I think that the whole thing about asking his dad, the very young version of himself, saying, "When are you going to hug me?" struck me as extremely heavy-handed.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I thought dads can be heavy-handed, especially dads who don't like their gay son.
Well,
you know.
That's true. But I thought that was overly heavy-handed, like overly. Yeah. You know, symbolic and too much therapy speak, really.
There's something very American about that.
Yeah.
You know, you go to America and all of a sudden you come back and you want to talk about your feelings.
Yeah.
And your dad's like, yeah, I'll just pass you to your mum.
Yeah. And she doesn't want to talk about her feelings either.
Yeah. Well, there's a funny thing with the mum as well. You were talking about the kind of weird lack of affection or slightly offhandedness between the mum and Elton. And there's an interesting subtlety where at the end she talks about sacrificing things for him. Yeah. He says, "What did you ever sacrifice?" And she said, "Your dad, for one." And it's really just left at that. But there's this whole thing about how the dad obviously hated the kid, you know, and that's emphasised even more so when you see his second family and he's very happy with his sons there. The dad obviously hated Elton, and that left the mum with this decision of who do I go with, and the fact that she chose her son and kind of drove the dad away because of that is like, on the one hand, it was something that you would never regret, but on the other hand, you would constantly then hold it against the son. And I think it was only left at this subtle thing that left you to infer all of that.
I think hatred is too strong a word.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's an evident discomfort and alienation from the son, right? Like, you know, kind of this boy who likes music and dresses, you know, is something that man can't relate to.
Yeah.
You know, and actually that he's embarrassed about and ashamed of, and you know, I mean, you also have to imagine what the culture was like in the 50s, the 40s and 50s, right? So, yeah, kind of, having an effeminate son like that is probably seen as like a failure on your part, right, to educate your son and raise them properly. So you see a distance and an alienation. Hatred is too strong.
No, I was talking quickly, and hatred is too strong. But still, the idea that kind of the choice that has kind of that the mother feels she's been forced to make, and the result being that despite the fact that she chose her son and gave up something very serious for her son, and how could she not, then still leads to a kind of ongoing resentment of him because of that.
Well, I think there's something interesting about relationships between parents and children, that children can't imagine their parents having desires, wishes, hopes, that exist outside of them. I think it's, I've seen that over and over again in kind of parent-child relationships, so I think maybe that is something that, the character of Elton John in the film, and maybe even the film itself, doesn't appreciate enough. Yeah, the fact that, the mother chose the child, or supports the child, or chooses the child over the partner, because often, that is not the case. Kind of parents often choose
but that's why I
the
think
partner as opposed to the child.
Well, that's why I think that's why it becomes a moment which is a revelation to Elton.
Yes.
That thing where she responds, because it's kind of a moment. I don't know exactly how that scene goes. It's that dinner scene, but it's a response you don't expect, and it's a response he doesn't expect. And the film has been in his head the whole time. That I think it's kind of fair enough that the film springs it as a surprise on the audience there too. Like he never looked at it this way.
Yes, but on the other hand, he did catch his mom cheating on his dad.
Yeah.
And it's clear that the only person he feels real support from is the grandmother. Yeah, you also get the feeling that the mother is very selfish.
Yeah.
And so on. So, but then in a way, that's what's really great about the film, that, it renders these things complex. The motives are multiple. It's not just one thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's good. Ultimately, I think it's good storytelling.
Yes.
And I think I do appreciate how it is left as something for you to infer, rather than spelled out in great detail. Like it's just this moment where the mum kind of expresses this sort of frustration at she, like, in a way that she's not been heard for a long time. She's never been heard by him, and this is this moment of release for her.
Yeah.
That affects him.
Yeah. Anyway, well, let's leave it at that. It's very, very good. I think it's very good, not only as an account of a pop star's life, but I think it's very good as a movie musical. Yeah. So kind of very much worth seeing. I think it's one of the best musicals I've seen in the last decade, really.
I think it's fantastic, and I fell in love with it completely, and I didn't expect to. And I've been listening to Elton John all night. I've been listening to the soundtrack versions, and I've been listening to original, and they. And I think one of the fantastic things that I think I mentioned is the way that the way the film reconfigures its songs to I assume Elton John had input on that.
Yes,
as part,
of course.
I can't imagine they weren't, which is probably why they are so good. But the way that people burst into song, or not burst into song, that's overdoing it, but the way that people will just move into song.
Yes.
They're walking away from a dramatic scene and they start singing a song.
I think it was a brilliant decision to allow Egerton to sing the songs as well. Because actually, his voice is not fantastic, but it's very good, and it does the job. And actually, there's something kind of immediate and human and so on that is kind of conveyed by him singing that wouldn't have been conveyed by him just mouthing the songs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also the case, that's also to a degree what I'm talking about with the film reconfiguring and rearranging its songs for the purposes of telling the story, as opposed to just singing the songs as the album versions, you know what I mean? It feels more honest and what's the word, holistic. The film is they become part of the film. They don't feel like The Greatest Showman, where it was like, I know the songs were written for The Greatest Showman, but it was kind of like we have to stop everything here and play a piece of pre-recorded music. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like that. It feels just beautifully organic and moving and flowing, and the whole film just flows from beginning to end, and the music helps it. It's great.
This is, much, much better musical than The Greatest Showman, which I thought was terribly manipulative and kind of...
The Greatest Showman is on a 12-inch LP. And not only that, I saw it, not only has it got an LP, but it's also got covers as an LP. So somehow, like, this thing has got legs. The Greatest Showman, people love it.
I know people love it.
It's got like a remaster.
But just because people love it doesn't mean it's not crap.
No, it's complete crap. But it's kind of mad to me that, like, I thought LPs were for audiophiles who take music super seriously, and they're like, "Ooh, you can hear all the clicks and scratches." It's like, but I listen to crap. I listen to crap covered by crap people, but I must listen to it on vinyl. Very weird to me.
Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we're on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube to listen to, and Facebook and Twitter on social media, and eavesdropping at themovies.com is the website. And if you leave us a review and stuff, or if you like us, then, or share us and stuff, then that's always really helpful.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
It's really good, Rocketman. It's really good.
Yes, it is.
Oh, your doll just fell down.
All right.